All right, welcome everybody. We'll get this going this time. Does that sound better? Restarting your computer always works, right? Um, let's see here. I want to get my setup all back here. I did start the recording. We're good there. All right. So welcome to All Things SOPPA slide deck, and everything is good here. The slide deck is a continual slide deck. So I looked it up, and we've been doing these for 12 weeks and started February 9th. So there should be content all the way back to February 9th within the slideshow. If you go to the very end, you should find some stuff. Also, all these are recorded, so you should be able to find them. And also, please schedule a time with me if you need further answers or clarification or those types of things on anything. As always, we're going to use Slido to ask questions, but I always throw in a question here just to get you into the system, just so that you know, or that you get into Slido so you can see where to ask questions and what questions are being asked and all those types of things. So please share with me how many times you've attended these, just to give me an idea and others ideas of the value of coming back from time to time. Again, these are held weekly. The main reason for that is that if I scheduled them every other week and for some reason you missed one of them, you'd miss up to 3 weeks of content. And so hopefully they are valuable enough for you to come each week and get something out of them. And then if not, you can always listen to the question and answer section on the YouTube playback to get an idea of what's going on, and if you've missed anything or if there's a question asked that you haven't heard before. So thanks for sharing. At least 24 of you have the ability to get in there and ask questions, and looks like everybody's doing a great job of doing that. So continue to do that, and we'll come back to the questions here in just a few minutes. The main question for people is, what is SOPPA? And many of you have been here from time to time, so you probably are figuring out what SOPPA is. And ultimately, what that is keeping track of the data privacy agreements with vendors that are using student information, being able to post those on your website and have a written agreement with those vendors. And then also providing reasonable security for your data and for your school with regards to student data. There's lots of information on this webpage. If you go down to the SOPPA section, all this information is here, including a small video that can be used with staff or with other people that you're explaining this to. Also, there's a Robin Schwartz in brief summarizing what SOPPA is and what it means to school districts and those types of things. So if you need information about what is SOPPA, that information is there and available to you. And then don't forget the other data privacy things such as FERPA and COPA and all those types of things that are still part of the process, and we can't forget about those types of things. So the weekly agenda here, you can see what we're going to do, and we'll kind of play catch up here and try to get through these things. This is a slide that I update on a weekly basis. I've been cutting off the beginning weeks, but I went back all the way to February 9th just to show where we're at now, 12 weeks later, and the growth of what we're doing and how we're doing it. The participating districts, that means that districts have an account, and those districts can be just that districts, or they can be ROEs, they can be vocational schools, they can be special ed co-ops. I think we even have a few private schools that have joined in the process as well. So of those 517 districts, there's a total of, well, when I took the statistic this morning, there was 2,341 agreements in the database. And I bet if we looked again right now, it would be over 2,400, just because it's growing that fast, and people are putting agreements in there and using the database. 159 school districts, and I think this is a important number to see growing. That means that those districts are putting an originating agreement um, in the database. So that's 159 different school districts have put a DPA in the database. So that's important to see that number grow, and see the relationship between that total number of districts. And then resource requests is just a number there that shows outside of the actual DPAs what other resources are out there that people are looking for agreements for. So those numbers are there. This list is a list of the most recent originating agreements that were posted online. Again, with all this database and all the numbers, going back to the numbers, if we look at the signed DPAs, there's 2,300 or 2,300 agreements online. And there's a lot of hands in this process and a lot of people in this process. And so just be aware that we are going to have some data errors and some different things going on. And so you may see repeats of originating agreements. That could be because they're being uploaded as 1.0A, whereas before they were a 1.0. So you may see some repetition here. I see a repetition as far as SysCloud backup and SysCloud security. That may not be repetition. That just may mean that there's two different products there, flat and flat for education. So just know that um, it's something that we're collaborating on. We're trying to use this at a statewide level, and there may be things that are duplicated. There may be things that are wrong, but we'll get through those things and figure out those things, um, and just kind of, I think that's one of the things that we got to keep in mind as we're going through this. The alternative is that you do everything on your own and don't have this process and this database to rely on and to see what other people are doing and those types of things. So it is a shared database. There are lots of hands um, in the process. So just keep that in mind as we're going here. And with one of those things, just kind of looking at tips and suggestions, I know this was the same thing that I had last week, but I just want to kind of bring this back to the forefront and make sure that um, when we're going through the process of getting an originating agreement, um, that process, if we do that right the first time, then the subscribing process is even easier and pretty straightforward. But if we're skipping steps or we're not quite getting everything checked that needs to be checked, then that just adds to the complexity of doing everything that we're doing. So next Monday, I'm going to be talking for an hour just about the Illinois NDPA and what it is and how it came to be and what the parts of it are and all those types of things, similar to what I did back in November and what Sean did in a full-length video. Sean Mullins from Olympia School District did in a full-length video that's a part of our YouTube playlist. But one of the things on page 2 is just these check boxes here to make sure that they're being checked appropriately, and whether that's by the vendor or by you as the school district. Just be aware that if you're providing an Exhibit E, that we should probably check this box. And so if you hear from me, that may be something that I'm following up on to make sure that we go back and we check that box and maybe re-upload the agreement for future reference. And then the Exhibit H, again, this is a reference to uh, specific terms for a vendor or for a school district. If you're using Exhibit H, then we need to make sure we mark this this is a good reference point for districts to, once they get to this page 2, they can look at it and say, okay, there's an Exhibit E and there's an Exhibit H. There always should be an Exhibit G because that's the Illinois specific rules. And then this slide is just kind of some of those check marks. I will have a actual document that'll be like the NDPA checklist for checking and kind of going through. Somebody on one of the email forums shared this list similar to this, and I've kind of added a couple things and moved things around, but I'm going to make this into a checklist so people can have that. So when you're subscribing to a agreement, you can check all these things. When you're creating an originating agreement, then you can create or use this checklist as well to make sure that those things are set up properly at the beginning. So again, I know we're into this process. This maybe is something we should add before, but we will get this set up for you. As always, I actually met with the registry enhancements for the ISPA database, SDPC database, and many states are putting in suggestions and those types of things. So, and Illinois has provided a few as well. So thank you for sharing those types of things. If there are other things that you see that we could use or things that are not quite right or could be better, definitely put those in the link in that Google form. They are being looked at and they will be enhanced at some point. A few other things that are part of the regular conversation, the ISBE update. This is for the model privacy procedures that were developed by IASB, the Illinois Association of School Boards. Those are available to anybody that has press policies, subscribes to that process, but they're also available to anybody that does not subscribe. So if you do not subscribe to press, send an email to them. If your school does subscribe to press, then check with your superintendent or whoever has access to get you access to the policies that are referenced here, the 7-345 and the APs and the exhibits and those types of things. Again, this is always here just for your reference. If you need something to communicate with teachers, it's available to you. The slide deck's available. Also, the actual webinar is available to you. This is a link that I haven't got onto the resources webpage yet, but I want to make sure that it was available. This was a panel discussion that was held last week and is available for you to watch as well. But it's basically a few different school districts sharing their experiences with Catch On, the Student Data Privacy Consortium, Learn Platform. And I don't know that we had anybody talking about ed privacy, but I think there was a little bit of reference to ed privacy or education framework as well. So that is a past event, but the recording should be available for you to register and watch in Zoom. And that will take you to that link. The resources page, again, not much has changed on it, just that you can find all kinds of different things here. The navigation for the database. If you haven't requested an account yet, you can do that with this green button, Join ISPA. The data privacy agreement that you can utilize and is there, as well as the YouTube playlists and also some PDF documents that share the workflow and those types of things to help you get started and communicate with your leadership and people at your district. And then on the right-hand side are all the upcoming events that you can participate in. There is a new video in the tutorials playlist. Sean created one for the Auto Exhibit E creator. that was just published today. So that should be available in the playlist and available for your viewing, but there's also 19 other videos there as well. Upcoming events, I mentioned the using the Illinois NDPA for SOPPA compliance. That's next Monday. And then I'm going to repeat the managing DPAs again on May 10th. I will have the video posted later this week from yesterday's session. So that'll be available on the resources page as we go. Just want to also bring attention to other things that are going on at the LTC specifically for tech people, but just some different webinars that we do around connecting people and just kind of having network roundtables basically around a specific topic. And then we're also doing some things with Microsoft as well. And then you can find all of our events that teachers and administrators and instructional coaches and everybody else can take advantage of with the events page. One other thing that I added this week was the IT Summer Summit is coming up in June. Basically, that's 3 days of sessions around tech issues and those types of things. And we're looking for presenters right now to share tools and different things that you're using, hardware, software, anything that you're using to support technology in your district, whether it be wireless, whether it be streaming, whether it be hardware, any of those little things. And we're going to do it a little bit different. We're doing like 30-minute presentations instead of an hour long. So trying to get more tech people to do presentations and share for 15 minutes and then answer a few questions, and then we'll move on to the next topic. So please submit your proposals for that. As always, one of the biggest questions is always around Google, Apple, Microsoft. What are we doing with them as far as getting agreements? And I'll just kind of leave this slide here for you to read. I am meeting with one of Adobe's resellers on Friday morning to talk about the Illinois NDPA and the possibilities of that working for Adobe. And we are in conversations with Apple, Microsoft, and Google as well with those types of things. We're not looking to, as the LTC, to make that agreement. We're just explaining what the Illinois NDPA is and trying to get them to look at that as a possible way of having an agreement with the school district and then being able to piggyback on that and using the subscribing process for that particular thing. All right, so we're caught up. Not too bad. Usually 20 after is where we're at when we come to the questions and answers. We do have I think Eric got back on here. I don't know that for sure. Eric, are you still here?
I am.
All right. Erich Grauke is here from the state board, and he'll help answer questions as we go if necessary. And then he's also, or actually, I'll just kind of turn it over to you for a second, Eric, and you can kind of share some things from your standpoint. And then if there's questions when we get to that point.
Yeah, just a couple more things as far as the model data privacy and practices. One of the other things that ISBE needs to do is come up with defining what the reasonable security standards are. And we've finally done that. We are going to be endorsing the LTC's recommendations that were put out a while back. Actually, I think Chris helped me out on that one, but they've been out there for a while, that are based on the CIS controls. So that'll be the recommendation that we have for districts to at least adopt those. Now, if you want to adopt other standards, that's fine. But the CIS controls, as listed by the LTC, are the ones that we're going to recommend as that being the reasonable security standards that the statute calls us for us to define. As far as the other things going with the law, we know that a lot of districts are, obviously concerned about larger installations like Apple, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, for things that we're currently, tracking that. Unfortunately, one of the things that we've been asked quite a bit is, why doesn't ISBE get involved and just have a master contract for everybody? And I wish we could personally, but being that we're an organ of state government and the school districts are organs of local government, there are all sorts of statutory reasons having to do with local control and other laws that prevent us from doing that. So I don't want to get into a big legal thing because I'm not a lawyer. So we'll leave that to them to further define if you really want to go down that rabbit hole. But we really can't do that, but that doesn't preclude districts from forming together to negotiate those terms, or for organizations like the LTC to form coalitions and groups and stuff to pursue those opportunities. So while we can't directly get involved in those contract negotiations between school districts and vendors as a third party, we are also offering the flexibility of the LTCs and stuff to at least negotiate those terms through the Student Data Privacy Consortium for those districts and those organizations and vendors that are choosing to go that route for SOPPA compliance. It looks like a lot of them are, based on the trends and the graphs and stuff that Chris showed earlier. As far as some of the other things, this isn't something that came from ISBE, just to also be clear on that. This is as a result of the state law that was passed. So we are also needing to implement that ourselves. And so we're also struggling with it as well as an organization. So there's all the things that the districts need to do in terms of putting together the contracts and putting those online and defining the data pieces and where those are going. We have to do those too as an organization. So you'll probably start seeing that coming up on our pages soon. But just wanted to let folks know and kind of come on today just to kind of just let people know about the definitions of the reasonable security standards that have finally been established, and to answer any questions that folks might have of us at the ISBE regarding SOPPA or any piece of implementation on that. So.
And Eric, did you mention the parent piece?
Oh, right. One other thing. So one of the other things that we're also having to work on, thank you, is the rules on the frequency of parent requests for the student data. So we're currently in some negotiations with that. We originally proposed and took us to an organization called JCAR, which is the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules, which is a bipartisan group of legislators that basically review all of the rules that are adopted as a result of a passage of state statute. The original draft had that parents could request one request per quarter to access their data. We had a number of parents that ended up wanting to increase that or have no limits on that. So we also had some other comments from other organizations that were in support of having some sort of limits. So we're trying to kind of parse through those comments and come up with a happy medium on that. We don't want to necessarily have a free for all, but also want to respect parents' concerns about being able to access these data things as well. But we're also cognizant of the fact that we also don't want to overburden districts with all of these requests coming in for these data pieces, which we don't know if it's going to be burdensome or not because we've never had this before. But we are currently trying to come up with some revisions based on those comments that we have. So those should be going back out for additional public comment back to JCAR, I think, within the next couple of weeks. So we may come back on another one of these in a week or two to kind of update folks in the process of that. But it looks like we may end up having a little bit of a higher limit, but still set a limit and make it quarterly. That way we're trying to avoid situations where you're going to get requests for this and requests for that a lot. But also, on the other hand, the laws clearly intends for parents to have access to this data. So we're just trying to figure out some rules and stuff that kind of satisfy the concerns of both groups and trying to get that down the middle, which is a lot harder than it sounds sometimes. So we're doing the best we can on that one, but it's kind of a new process for me to write rules based on legislation. So I'm getting kind of schooled on that too, which is an interesting process.
All right. Thanks, Eric. And Eric will be around if any questions come up that he can answer, he will definitely do that. And as always, if there are questions that around things with regards to ISBE and the requirements and stuff like that, I can definitely pass those along to him as well with this process. So let's look at the questions, and we'll again try to go through as many questions as we can. If we don't get to your question, or if we don't answer it the way further with enough information, then definitely reach out or unmute yourself and ask the question again in a way that will help with clarification. So kind of the way we go about this is I will, if I can, I'll jump in and out of the database and be able to show you some things. So there's some things we can definitely show you how to do. So the first question is, how can I add a resource that does not require an Illinois NDPA because it collects no student data? I want to list that resource for teachers. So that is something you can do in the database. And ultimately, and I always recommend that you use the ISPA website to start your things. That way you see upcoming things going on. But log into your database with your account, and you would go to add a new agreement. No, I don't have a contract. Select the resource that you want. And I'm just going to select Arduino and then just kind of leave this other stuff here for being blank. And then I can actually, and maybe I shortcutted that a little bit. Maybe I don't know how to do that. Let me table that and I'll make that. I thought it was just that easy, but it's not. Sorry. I will do that as a follow-up to this, or I will just make it part of next week's how-to stuff. Sorry about that. I thought that I knew exactly how to do that. And I'll double check and make sure that if we don't have a video for that, we will make a video for that. So my apologies. I thought that was going to be an easy one, and I was wrong. If our school works with special education co-op, is the school responsible for listing the apps that the cooperative uses with students, or is it the co-op? It would be the co-op's responsibility to have an agreement with those particular apps. So they would have the data privacy agreement. I don't believe that it would be your responsibility to have any kind of data privacy agreement, but I would kind of keep track of those applications that those districts or that those co-ops and vocational schools and all those types of things are doing, and even at the state level, just have kind of a running list of applications that you know where your student data is at, whether you're responsible for it or not. That way you have that list and you can look at that list and be able to share that with everybody, that your leadership knows that that's the case, that your student data is in a particular application, but it's not something that you're actually necessarily, quote, responsible for. And that would be the same with what I've been recommending as far as like state testing and those types of things. Just know where those data elements are, or where your student data may be, and create that. We are working to get all DPAs done, but we have thousands of applications in use. Is there assurance we won't go to SOPPA jail as long as we keep working? Eric, do you want to answer that?
Well, as far as I'm aware, there's no such thing as SOPPA jail. If there is, they didn't tell me about it. But I think I would, again, kind of with the standard disclaimer that I'm not giving any sort of legal advice by saying this here, but I would think that, good faith efforts to try to get as much as you can through these, into the process and make sure that things are compliant are going to serve you the best, and to keep working at it, even if you're not quite done on July 1st, as long as there's a good faith effort to keep going with these things, then you'd be okay. But again, I'm not saying that that's not legal advice, that, I don't think there's going to be any sort of like SOPPA jail, so to speak, but hopefully these applications are ones that have signed on to NDPAs or have privacy policies that are in compliance or substantial compliance with elements of SOPPA, that use of those after the July 1st date, even without a formal agreement, wouldn't pose any major problems. But again, I would check with your district's legal counsel, because your mileage may vary based on their answer.
Great, thanks. And that's really the answer that I've been giving as well. So I just wanted to make sure I put you on the spot there just to test you.
Yeah, but keep in mind too that these are applications that require it's required only if the applications are transmitting personally identified information as defined by the SOPPA Act.
Yep.
Outside the certain exceptions, like, so if there's applications that exchange data with, like, ISBE, for example, you don't need a data agreement for that, because there's an exception built into the law regarding things like that. But if it's an application that doesn't use any sort of protected information at all, you don't need a thing for that either, because the data, while there may be data, it's not of the type that the Act is most concerned about. So hopefully, it's based on that you might be able to whittle down your list a little bit. But if it really is thousands, really just try to do the best you can in a good faith effort to bring everything into compliance. And as long as it happens, hopefully, if something were to happen, at least that it would be said that you're working on it. Again, I can't really predict what would happen in future hypothetical. And again, I'm not able to give legal advice, but I would think that we're trying to being able to demonstrate that you're working to comply with everything after July 1st would be far better than basically having done nothing and like, well, now we're working on it. Well, it might be too late then.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And I think that just even from a standpoint of knowing what applications, knowing what we're using in school districts, I think we've had this conversation before as well. Just knowing from a curriculum standpoint, knowing what's being used at grade levels, what's being used in subject areas, all those types of things that we've kind of, especially through the pandemic, lost some of that control, and trying to get that control back specifically. And just so when somebody asks you, are we using this application, you'll be able to say, yes, we are. Do we have a data privacy agreement? Ultimately, you can start talking through whether or not you needed one, and all those types of things. So definitely just making progress towards that, knowing what's available and what you're using is going to go a long ways, just in your district in general. So
yeah, I think that Chris brings a good point too. That might be a good chance to maybe weed through your application collections. If something that is on the list but it's not really being used by anybody, then get it out of there. Then we don't have to worry about having an agreement with something that no one's using.
And the question, this question's been asked several times as well, and there's the best answer. I'm not sure. It really depends on what those web browser extensions do and how they interact with your student data. Do they have student data that's going back and forth, or are they internal to, like, there's some scripts and stuff in Google add-ons that are just really doing things within your environment, not necessarily sending information out of your district or out of your Google domain. But just first step is being aware of what those extensions are. The second step is kind of as a collaboration of what we're doing here, knowing what those applications are actually doing, and whether or not they need an application is something that once one of us figures it out, we should all know about it. And the other kind of stumbling block with all those types of things, and with some of the apps that we're going to be using, and we're going to have to weigh the risk of that, is do we know even who to get a data privacy agreement with, and will they sign a data privacy agreement? And so just knowing some of those things and making determinations of, is it worth using that application, and not knowing the answers to some of those questions. So those are some things that we're going to have to work through as individual districts and as a collaborative. So if anything is showing on Exhibit H, then I assume the district lawyers would need to approve before I sign. Is that true? Ultimately, that is the case. The idea of the Illinois NDPA is that it's a consistent document, that if you initially have your attorney vet it, then, or review it, and they say it's okay to use, then the Exhibit H would be different from that, and they're going to have to make determinations on whether or not they agree to those terms or not those terms, and what that means to you as a district. So, and then ultimately, as you continue to use the Illinois NDPA, and those types of things are commonly showing up in Exhibit H's, that may be something down the road that we can incorporate into the Exhibit G so that it is consistent. But until then, your lawyer may just be able to say, okay, if this shows up, that's okay, let's go ahead and move forward. But that's, again, a lawyer's decision ultimately. At an earlier All Things SOPPA, you showed a location to check if someone is currently pursuing a DPA with a vendor. Can you show? I can show that. I do know how to do that. So I will do that. So under your resources, view statewide new requests. This is basically all those requests. And if you look down here, there's 716 entries in this particular section of the database. And then within that, you can actually search based on certain whatever application it is. So I'm just going to search for EduTyping. You'll see here that there's 3 different districts that have that listed. Without the progress, we don't really know why they're listed there. So it could be that they just want to know if there is an agreement at some point. So they may have just, this may be their holding point for that, they use that application and they're going to put that in as an agreement at some point, but it's not in there yet. So that wouldn't be necessarily a good one to look up. But anything that has progress in it, you can kind of look. So like here's one for FastBridge, Go Guardian Teacher. The request was sent. RevTrack, the request was sent. So those are some of the things that you would see. This is the area that you would see that. So if you search for a product, so if I search for GimKit, you'll see that there's nothing here as far as progress goes. So this is just a holding pattern for these 3 schools to be able to add this as an agreement. But if I go over here to view all DPAs, this is where you actually look to see if there is an agreement for you to sign on to. So if I type in GimKit here, I don't know why GimKit is my go-to right now, but I think I like saying it. But you'll see that there is an originating agreement here for that, and that all these schools have signed on to that original agreement. And there is a, so I mentioned the progress, and it looks like Scott's mentioned the progress markers as well. There is a couple slides in the All Things SOPPA presentation that will show you how to set up that progress markers, and also there should be a tutorial video to show that as well. And then I showed that yesterday, and I will show it again on May 10th, how that works as well. I'm interested in in-person SOPPA workshops, but they are quite a distance from me. Will there be any in Northern Illinois, or did I miss them already? It's not something that we're scheduling regularly regular workshops. If there is a need for that, we can definitely work with ROEs or groups of schools to do some of those types of things. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would suggest reaching out to either your ROE or reaching out to your RETC with the LTC to schedule something, or you can reach out to me and I'll start that progress as well. So if you're interested in something like that, definitely reach out and say something and be specific about what part of Illinois we want those in. And that's kind of going along those thought processes. If there is that mindset of, like we do with the face-to-face meetings with E-rate, and if you feel like that type of environment would be beneficial to getting together and different things like that, that's definitely something we can look at doing moving forward and working to getting those regularly scheduled. And just, I think the main advantage of it is that you can be away from school and focused on a specific task and not worried about distractions and all those types of things. So if there is need for that, definitely reach out. On the page of statewide Illinois NDPAs, is it possible to have the company name listed? That's something that I'll have to reach out to the STPC for and see if that's something that we can customize. But that's definitely something we can ask about. We don't have any control over that, but we can ask. Good question. So I will add that to my list of things to check out. Do we need no, we just kind of talked about that. So you should not need an Illinois NDPA with state agencies. Again, I am recommending that you have a list of what those particular apps may be or particular situations may be, just so that you have that information. We all kind of know that.
Yeah, this is in section 26 of the Act, where this specifically lists the requirements, but yeah, you don't need Illinois DPAs for state agencies.
Thanks, Eric. Is there a company out there that can be hired to do SOPPA compliance? Not that I'm aware of. I guess the closest thing you would get would be, so number one is you have to inventory your application. So some way you would have to give a company access to somehow get that information. Once they had that information, then they would go and get data privacy agreements and have you sign them. Ultimately, I guess that would be your lawyer as well. So I don't know that there's any particular company out there. There's software applications such as the STPC database, Catch On, Education Framework, Learn Platform, that are all have mechanisms within themselves to help with the process, but they won't necessarily be hiring you, or you wouldn't hire them to actually do the compliance, because the ultimate compliance is having that written agreement that says you're going to do all this stuff with, that they're going to do what they do with their data, what they're going to do, what they can't do with the data, all those types of things. So I guess the answer to that is really not that I'm aware of, but there are kind of pieces of it that you could figure out. If there is a signed NDPA with a company such as Pearson, but the specific product we use is not listed in Exhibit A, do we need our own signed NDPA? Yeah, I'm going to say yes. There needs to be an agreement for that particular application. And ideally, what I've seen in some cases is that the full agreement, you would need an agreement with Pearson for that specific product. whether it was part of another agreement or an agreement on your own. So it would have to be listed and be part of that agreement in order for you to have a signed agreement with it. So if you were the only one in the state using that application, then yes. If another school in the state has already gotten that or that agreement, then you could possibly subscribe to that as well. And that's a feature in future versions of the future versions of the Student Data Privacy Consortium database tools, is that there are states that are asking for specific Exhibit A's and Exhibit B's to be customized based on your school's needs, because that is kind of specific. Currently, it's kind of a one-size-fits-all with that agreement, but there are some talk about creating that customized Exhibit A and Exhibit B specifically for your district. But ultimately, you'd have to have that agreement with the vendor as well, just to know that they are listing that as a service for their particular product. When exporting an Excel file of the district agreements, is there a way to get the company name to be exported? That would be the same thing. If that company name was listed as a field, it would be part of the Excel. So if I can get that as part of that, that would also be, whatever's showing up in that table is what's being exported. So that would be part of the Excel if it was available. If your school does not agree to the schedule of data on the Illinois NDPA, does the school have to complete another Illinois NDPA? Ultimately, yes. If you don't agree to what's there, then you shouldn't subscribe to something. And then you should ultimately have a different NDPA with your schedule of data. And that goes back to that idea of, in the future, that may not be the case, where you could actually update your own Exhibit B. That would be your schedule of data, but right now that functionality does not exist, so you would have to enter in another agreement. Do we need to add a vendor in SDPC if there is not student data collected? Not necessarily. So the only reason you would want to do that is if you want to keep track of that as part of your public facing resource listing that would include those applications. And that was similar to the question that was asked earlier about how do we get applications that don't collect data into the database so that you can see those on the back end, or on the public facing. So that is something that I will address and get answers for those questions. So this is something that we are trying to get clarification on. The Exhibit F has to do with security. There's lots of, if we really went back and went through all of them, I think there's some that are lacking anything checked on the Exhibit F. And I think that's something we want to continue to explore. Ultimately, that is the vendor's cybersecurity practices. And so we want to make sure that that is the case. Ultimately, that is a question for lawyers, but I think as far as best practice, we want to make sure that the vendor is filling that out, or at least making note of why they didn't fill it out, so that we can be aware of that. And that's not just Harvard. There's other instances where that's the case. And if you do come across those, let me know about those, just so those can be put on a list and we can follow up and make sure that we do that. As a special ed co-op, we work with several other school districts. Do these relationships require a DPA? No, not necessarily. You wouldn't need a DPA. I don't believe you'd need a DPA. With those types of organizations, you should have relationships already built in with that kind of thing. Ultimately, you want to make sure that um, your data privacy or your security practices as far as who has user accounts and how those user accounts are protected, and audit logs about how they're accessing and who's accessing and all those types of things. So you want to make sure as the keeper of that data that you're keeping track of who's accessing it and those types of things. But as far as an actual data privacy agreement, in the sense that we're talking about a data privacy agreement for SOPPA, you wouldn't need that, but you might need something as far as like a intergovernmental agreement or something along those lines, which you probably already have, and have relationships with staff and those types of things, who's using applications and that kind of thing right now. And I don't have the time. We're right at 3 o'clock. I'll go ahead and continue. It looks like we only have a few more questions here. So as always, I will just make sure that as people are leaving, know that there's other events coming up. We'll get together for All Things Open next week. And then the Illinois NDPA and the database tools are there on the 3rd and the 10th. And as always, if you have any questions, definitely follow up with me beyond this work session, and or schedule a time with me to follow up with questions. So I'll continue to answer questions as we go here. And I appreciate you sticking around for the chaos there was at the beginning. Also, if you do have any questions and you want to unmute and ask as well, we can do that as well. But I'll just go ahead and kind of continue down this. Thanks, Eric, for joining us and sharing that insight, and we'll look forward to more updates as we go here in the coming week.
I can stay on for a few more minutes if someone's got a question of me or
okay.
something pops up.
Yep. How are districts addressing iOS apps in which the developer service provider cannot be identified because the app is no longer available in the App Store? Again, that would be one of those things. I don't know how specific districts are, and if there are districts that are doing that, please let me know, and I can share that answer. But ultimately, that's on that risk assessment type of thing. Like, is it necessary to use that app? Are there other apps that could be used? So if it's, especially if it's using student data, is it something that you want to be using as a school district that would be have the potential of causing issues with student data? We have operators putting links, attachments for their privacy policy, terms of service, COPPA, iKeepSafe, etc. in H. Should our lawyers review these too? Ultimately, I guess I would be on the side of, at least initially, just like questioning why it's necessary to do that. If the district, or if, because this is not really about terms of service or about the a contract with, or an invoice or paying. It is really about data privacy. So COPPA really doesn't have anything. I mean, it has stuff to do with data privacy, but it's a different component. Ultimately, I guess, err on the side of checking in with your lawyers at least the one time, just to make sure that they're feel it's necessary. If they don't feel it's necessary, then I would just see if you could leave them out, because again, that just causes that issue of, if you're putting it in your Exhibit H, then everybody else has to go through and vet and review that with their attorneys. And if it's not necessary, then it would make it a lot easier for everybody else if it wasn't there as well. So ultimately, I guess it depends on what your lawyer says. Is there an explanation difference between, or what is the difference between Exhibit G, H, and E? Just a plug for next Monday at 3 o'clock. Join us and we'll talk about all things Illinois NDPA, and the same thing with what the Exhibit B is. But G is the state exhibit. That's all the Illinois terms that were added to this agreement. H is anything specific that a specific district wants to add to H, they can do that. Ultimately, that makes it harder for the subscribing process, or a vendor wants to add specific things to Exhibit H because they don't agree with something in the full agreement. Ultimately, that causes issues with everybody having to then vet that Exhibit H, which in that case, ultimately, you might as well just have a separate agreement because everybody's got to vet that agreement. And then the Exhibit E is there for vendors to offer to districts to be able to sign on to that agreement as it is, and then all they do is sign it and send that Exhibit E to the vendor, and they agree to the full agreement that was originally there. Exhibit B basically is just the data elements that are used. So any application that uses data, that would be filled in by the vendor initially. If for some reason you look at it and see that there's other things, then that would be a back and forth to work with the vendor to see if there's too much data in there or there's not enough data in there to make sure that that Exhibit B says what you're sharing with that particular vendor. And we'll just go ahead and finish out the questions here. What constitutes use? If you have a teacher using a program one-to-one with a student, does this require an agreement? Is there a threshold? The threshold is if there's student data involved in the with the application. So if there's student data that's being stored by the application or transferred back and forth with the application, then you need a data privacy agreement, even if it's a one-to-one in the sense that one student is using one application. You would definitely need that. I'm interested in using the staff resource request form on the customized resource listing. However, when testing it, I don't see where the answers go. So that should be a video, but ultimately those are going to go in as new requests. So they should be in your manage agreements, and also in your manage agreements, you should see the new requests that are listed there for your use. And we can look at that more as part of that process next week. I'll make sure that we talk about using the request form, but that is something that is, I think we do have a video on that, so I'll make sure of that as well. And so we have an agreement for each app and not the parent company. Example, McGraw-Hill and ConnectEd and Wonders. So we have to have an agreement for each app and not the parent company. Ultimately, yes, I mean, because if you start looking at those particular apps, I mean, it may be that the parent company will list those particular apps, so they may list it as their services, as in ConnectEd and Wonders and all those types of things. The only thing that I would be leery of is if a particular app like ConnectEd collects certain information and then Wonders maybe collects other information, just being aware that what's being collected by which app, and if there is an issue with some type of incident or breach or something like that, then those are going to be two different situations. Also, if you no longer use one of the applications, getting the information out of that particular app versus the other app, just making sure they're all covered by the data privacy agreement, I think is going to be important. So